Geetha Sadhana Sopaana, a book published by Adhyatma Prakasha Karyalaya, Hole Narsipura. We have been seeing it. Now we shall continue. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. From verse 4 of chapter 6 Bhagavad Gita, it is seen that the description of an Arudha, one who is accomplished in yoga, is exactly the same as the description as that of the one who has attained Naishkarmya, meaning a lack of any attachment to the senses or with any activity and complete abandonment of all volitions. This indicates that the one who has attained Naishkarmya, referred to the verse 18.49 Bhagavad Gita, is the same as the one who is said to be accomplished in yoga, mentioned in verses 6.3 and 4 Bhagavad Gita. Hence, the word yoga in the Gita is to be understood as Naishkarmya, actionlessness, the attitude of the dexterous performance of action, giving up all attachment to activities at every stage, from the volition, the very thought to perform the action, right up to the enjoyment of the fruit of that action. Another conclusion that can be drawn from this is that the yoga arudha is the one who has ascended to yoga, and it refers to the same person who has accomplished Naishkarmya and who is also called a Jnananistha, one who is established in knowledge. He is the one who is entitled to know the truth because it is its culmination described in verse 18.50 Bhagavad Gita as Parajnana Nishtha. The supreme culmination of its establishment in knowledge is the final attainment of Brahman. In this context of having knowledge alone as the only goal, it should be mentioned that according to the Gita, the only cause of being deluded is the shrouding of one's own awareness of the true nature of the self because of ignorance. This ignorance, along with its effect, the unquenchable desire situated in our senses, mind, and intellect, is completely annihilated by its opposite, knowledge. It is this knowledge that illumines the supreme reality like the bright sunshine that has removed all darkness. Bhagavad Gita 5.16. From the above cited verses, it is clear that it is the vision of the aspirant that is clouded over and not reality itself. Some people have argued that this shrouding is actually the shrouding of reality itself and not our own vision. They quote phrases from the Gita like enveloped by Yoga Maya, etc., as their proof. But such a reading will invalidate the clear statements of the Gita that what is in fact shrouded is one's own knowledge. If reality were to be in fact shrouded, assurances such as knowledge has the capacity to destroy ignorance and to illumine reality will stand contradicted in that knowledge cannot actually create or remove anything, including a shrouding over reality. When we are told that desires are born out of this ignorance, what is implied is that this ignorance must be situated in us, and that is where the shrouding is taking place. Hence, to arrive at the correct understanding of verse 7.25 Bhagavad Gita, containing the phrase covered by Yogamaya, we have to read the second chapter of the first line of the verse with the second half of the verse. The verse would then read as follows: the ignorant, mudha, ignorant people, lokaha, mudaha lokaha, the ignorant people covered by yogamaya do not know me as indestructible and unborn. This would be in line with the earlier verse 7.13 of Bhagavad Gita, where the delusion of the whole world by which people do not know the indestructible is attributed to the gunas. And in the next verse itself, this is made clear by the statement: this divine Maya of the nature of gunas is hard to cross over. It is only with this understanding that the shrouding of ignorance is in fact in me and not in the Lord, that an aspirant will make efforts to get rid of it. This also leaves no doubt that the removal of ignorance which resides within us will have to be removed dependent on our own efforts. All hope of salvation will be obliterated if we understand that reality itself is actually being shrouded or covered over. In discussing the definition of yoga, we can also examine verses 2:28 to 48. Chapter 2, 28th shloka to 48th shloka, and 6.20 Bhagavad Gita, as well as 6.14 to 6.18, where karma phala tyaga, the abandonment of the fruit of action, is considered as yoga in a secondary sense because this practice leads to the real yoga in its primary sense. To sum up, karmas cannot be given up, for that will merely lead to tamas. Karma must be performed, but its performance should become an aid to liberation and not an obstacle that strengthens our bondage even further. That dexterous way of engaging oneself in karma and still not being conscious of performing it is called nishkarmya, and the performance perfection of this state is called from different angles of vision nishkarmya siddhi, the perfection of actionlessness, jnana establishment in knowledge, or parabhakti, supreme devotion. This is the state which is the precursor to the attainment of the knowledge of Brahman and final release from samsara. Thus, maintaining oneself always in yoga only, the yogi, freed from all defects, easily obtains the highest incomparable happiness, known as contact with the Brahman. Bhagavad Gita 6.28. If, on the other hand, the word yoga is taken as merely indicating karma yoga, several contradictions arise. One seeming contradiction would be that while sannyasa, renunciation, is said to be not merely giving up the ritual fire, if the yogi and the sannyasi should be treated as the same, as verse 2 of chapter 6 asks us to do, then a sannyasi also cannot give up the ritual fire. This would go against the Vedic scriptural teaching, acknowledging the stage of sannyasa as free from any duty to perform the fire ritual, and the Gita is said to be the very quintessence of the Vedas. Similarly, in verse 6.3 of Bhagavad Gita, the one who wants to attain to yoga is said to be a muni, a person for whom contemplation has become a habit, thereby indicating that it is the mental attitude which is the essential requirement for yoga. Otherwise, Arjuna's anguish expressed in Bhagavad Gita 6.33 to 34 becomes incomprehensible. His understanding of yoga is that it equates to equanimity of the mind, in which sense alone the penultimate verse in chapter 6, in which a yogi's superiority is assured over those engaged in karma, becomes meaningful. Besides, Arjuna has given his assurance that the Lord's teaching, his delusion, moha, has been removed. To say that karma is an essential part of yoga and then to declare that yoga is superior to karma would be meaningless. This distinction between karma yoga and yoga is essential to understand Arjuna's question as well as the Lord's answer to the beginning at the beginning of chapter 5. Arjuna's question is about the choice between karma and renunciation, sannyasa, both of which he says the Lord is praising. The Lord, in his reply, assured Arjuna that both Karma Yoga and Sannyasa lead to the final liberation, and later the Lord enlarged the meaning of the words to mean Yoga and Sankhya. In chapter 3, the Lord has mentioned that Sankhya is for Jnanis. In the Bhagavad Gita 2.39, he mentioned that the portion taught earlier was Sankhya, by which expression he was obviously referring to the knowledge of the self and the discrimination between the self and not self, delineated from verse 2.11 onward. This points to the fact that in the Lord's view, sannyasa renunciation means sankhya, knowledge of the self, jnana nishtha, establishment in knowledge of the self, or naishkarmya siddhi, the perfection of actionlessness, the preparation for which is yoga, since the Lord has said that there is nothing comparable in purity to knowledge, nahi jnane sadrisham pavitram he vidyate, which is the yoga samsiddhi, the culmination of yoga. That is why sannyasa is well nigh impossible to one who is not a yogi. While Bhagavan assures us that a muni accomplished in yoga quickly attains Brahman. In verse 18.50, it is explained that it is only after attaining Siddhi, which has been referred to as Naishkarmya Siddhi in the previous verse, that one can reach Brahman. The word sannyasa found in verse 5.6 must also be equated with Naishkarmya Siddhi. The key word to be taken note of in this context is the word Muni, the one to whom contemplation has become his second nature. The Lord says, establishing yourself in yoga and giving up attachment, perform karma, O Dhananjaya, viewing both siddhi and otherwise equally, since equanimity is yoga. If yoga were to be understood as merely karma yoga, this special mention to perform karma with the qualification yoga, both these being essential parts of karma yoga, would be redundant. The pointer here is that yoga with karma yoga will lead to siddhi. In short, Sankhya, the knowledge of the self, should be reached by yoga coupled with karma, while Sankhya is sannyasa, since the identification with karma has ceased. While discussing the six valid means to decide the import of this text, as adopted by the Purvamimamsakas, it was seen that the chief import of the teaching of the Gita is the removal of grief through the removal of delusion, moha. The Lord describes yoga in exactly this way when he says that we should know yoga to be the complete detachment from association with grief, dukkha sanyoga viyoga, indicating that the yoga discussed in chapter 6 is the means for the attainment of the final goal taught in the Gita. So, next point we shall discuss in the next session, that is necessity of discrimination, buddhi, and devotion, bhakti, in the perfection of yoga siddhi. That we shall see in the next session. Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Sadguru Charanarpitamastu, Sarve Jana Sukhino Bhavantu, Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu, Sajjana Santu Nirbhayaha, Shri Krishna Arpanamastu, Om Tat Sat.